To date, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter has won every competition on a global scale that has entered. But there are new headwinds that are emerging. Some of those, well, they're geopolitical. Others are just the market realities as sixth-generation fighters are getting underway. What the market looks like now and what the market looks like in the future is the subject of this next roundtable.
The program of record for the U.S. is 2456 F-35s. That basically hasn't shifted since the program began. 1763 for the Air Force, the biggest buyer. International customers, technically unknowable because everyone could be an international customer. The point is, there is a lot of still planning to buy these things in the future. But it seems like right now in this moment, there's a couple of headwinds that haven't been there in the past. The first one is internal to the U.S., and that starts with both some comments we've seen from people in the new administration or people associated with the new administration, like Elon Musk saying, why are we even looking at manned fighters, the F-35 in general? How are you looking at the budget in the F-35 going forward?
That it's a big challenge. You've got the Sentinel program in the Air Force. Let's just look at the Air Force budget, because you've got the Sentinel program well over budget. They're trying to recover from that. The B-21 is in the process of moving from R&D money to procurement money. It hasn't been in the same pocket as the F-35. Now going forward it will be. Next generation air dominance, the F-47, is a new program that's going to be ramping up money. It's not in the procurement budget, but it still has to fit within that Air Force top line. The Air Force has to make trades. They're still trying to buy T-7. They're still trying to buy KC-46. They're still trying to buy MH-139. All kinds of programs out there. And what the Air Force has traditionally done over the last many years is when things get tight, they squeeze the annual rate of F-35s. They take that number down, give it a haircut of 10 or 12, trusting that Congress will restore some of those airplanes. And they usually restore some, but not all of those airplanes. But yes, with all those things trying to fit in to the Air Force budget, the F-35 becomes the malleable portion.
Val, you're a Congress reporter. I mean, do you think Congress will, let's assume this happens again, Congress does add things back in. Do you think that's potentially going to happen this year?
I mean, it's very hard to say. We don't even have a budget right now, so kind of predicting the future here. I think it's very possible that some get added in. Does it get you to the numbers that maybe we were seeing in past FYDPs? I don't think so. It's going to continue to be very challenging this year on the Hill to get any legislation through. This past year, we did not have a full year defense appropriations bill. Everyone in Congress wants to see a defense appropriations bill passed this year. They want to see normal appropriations return. I think it's going to be easier said than done, just because you have Democrats that do not really want to work with Republicans, and the Republicans are not really giving them a reason to. That really limits the ability to push forward things in a normal sort of cadence.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you have to pay for the F-47 somehow, and once you start fielding the next generation, is there even a need or emphasis as much on what the current generation of capability is? You've got the international competitions, GCAP, SCAF, that could also pull customer money away. Something interesting too is that President Trump talked about exporting the F-47, maybe a scaled down version.
Right.
I actually think that regardless of whether that happens or not, obviously the F-22 was never exported, but I think if you see an exportable F-47, it would be very hard to export that adaptive engine technology too. So maybe that's an area you sacrifice. And if you're a customer looking between F-35 that by that point, ideally, would be a lot more mature. And this aircraft, according to planners, is going to fly until 2088. So, does it last that long, I think is an open question, but it certainly still has a lot of runway left as a program. So if you're looking to buy a next generation, by then the F-35 may well be a more dependable program and far more mature, and you may not want to take the risk.
Yeah. And you're looking at, for the same money as an F-47, getting 2 to 3 F-35s. A lot of foreign countries are going to look at that deal and say, why am I spending this much on one jet when I can get 3?
I have a different perspective than you on this. I think that just the cost of F-47 is going to make it really hard to ever get to that program of record number, which is only 200, right? Something like that. The prevailing wisdom is that we're not going to get all of the F-35s that are part of the program of record. I think that's probably true of any aircraft program, including F-47. We could also end up in a situation where, sort of similar to the F-22, the F-47, program ends a little early, and then you see the older program, the F-35, surviving because it is established, it is cheaper. And then, when it comes to GCAP and SCAF, those are still paper airplanes at this point, and we'll have to see if those ever actually come to fruition. So it's kind of hard to say now whether any of those are going to be able to eat into the F-35 buy.
But the other real foreign challenge, as we were talking about earlier, is the politics. Do countries consider the United States to be a reliable supplier? Do they want their next aircraft to come from the United States, whatever it is? We see, particularly in Europe, tremendous energy going into developing an independent defense industry, and that means great pressure to buy European, and those aircraft can be sold around the world. The Rafale order book is filling. We've got extensions on Eurofighter, and GCAP and SCAF are not that far off. So suddenly, yes, there are a lot of choices when you go down to your aircraft dealer that weren't there 2 weeks ago.
We should say GCAP is the British, Japanese, and Italian combination.
With a little Swedish contribution
Swedish,
that's
depending
not
on how
official.
you, right.
Yep.
And then FCAS, which is also technically known as GCAP, but we call FCAS for our sanity, is the French, German, Spanish equivalent. Certainly, I think those are countries that have all bought into the F-35, and if they're looking at maybe future F-35 buys, but now they're thinking, well, we need to invest domestically. Maybe those money that could go into future F-35 additions get pushed into those programs.
And then there's also the question of what happens here in the United States. If foreign countries, potential buyers look at the US and they see that we're not investing in the F-35, why should they?
And Aaron, you mentioned the U.S. Air Force, 1,763 aircraft, a number that has lasted the duration of the F-35 program. They're now talking about 1,300, 1,200 as their goal. Change that, and the economics change for other people buying the F-35.
I think there's certainly expectation that autonomy will play a much greater, if not primary role in air combat in 2 decades, maybe a little bit less than that. How much you push that pedal can determine really the future of the program, because if you make that transition to autonomy much more quickly, you have less of a need.
But you can make the argument that if you believe the future is uninhabited aircraft, you have to buy NGAD, because that's the controller, that's the person in the equation. You don't have to buy F-35 to support that future.
I think within this administration, the F-47 is going to be safe. I don't think that after we saw, President Trump at the White House standing in front of, the rendering and talking about how the F-47 is a beautiful number, I think that one is going to survive the next 4 years.
That seems likely. Despite all this, and we're talking a lot about the headwinds, it should be noted that if you consider the number of F-35s that the Air Force is still looking at buying, the rest of the U.S. military, all of the international customers, there's still interest from other countries out there. We know, for instance, the Saudis in the past have expressed interest. That hasn't happened, but there's other people who are still looking at buying F-35s even now. This is still arguably one of the most successful, in many ways, fighter programs in history.
Even if it stopped today, that would be true, in terms of the number of countries that have adopted it, in terms of the number of aircraft delivered. And yes, if they go with the current order book, it's going to be up there in history with the F-16 and the F-4 at over 3, maybe even 4,000 aircraft delivered. But all of that calculation was valid before the United States started changing its political approach to the rest of the world. And now there's an element of uncertainty that didn't exist with this program before. So if we look at the history of the F-35, they've overcome some massive technical challenges. Now they're running into the political ones.